Hi, everyone. So, I'd like to begin by asking you all a series of related questions. Why are you here? Why are you here in this place, located on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory, right now? Why have you decided to share this precious moment of your life, your sunny evening, with us? What's your intention? What's your hope? What are your responsibilities? How I answer these questions is admittedly selfish. I'm here for myself. I'm here because there's an imbalance in my spirit. There's an imbalance in my spirit because there's injustice in my life that haunts my every step. There's injustice in my life because many of my brothers and sisters are suffering in human warehouses like OCDC. While survivors of what we call crime, including the loved ones of prisoners, also suffer. They're suffering because the powerful of privilege, criminalization, and punishment instead of understanding and healing in the face of social conflicts and harms that have become the property of the penal system and its actors. The powerful of privilege, criminalization, and punishment because enough of us have consented to this arrangement where violence is met with violence. A violence that does violence to our spirits, a violence that keeps us perpetually angry and imbalanced. Have you ever seen anyone go through the penal process and come out of it, whether you're a victim, whether you're accused, found guilty, community members that are watching this? Do any of us leave that process not angry? So we call for more violence in the form of more police, more courts, more prisons, and yet we're never at peace. We're never at peace with ourselves and all our relations. So the proposals articulated today, if implemented, I think would help reduce the harms experienced by those living and working at the Innis Road Jail, as well as their loved ones. And these proposals, however, are just that, a means to attenuate the violence of incarceration. They won't, and I know some people would disagree with me, they won't fix OCDC. They will not fix OCDC because OCDC is not broken. It's not broken because the deprivation of liberty, whether experienced as a captive or a captor, is a violent relationship that sustains an unequal and unjust social order. And seen in this light, we're focused to grapple with the fact that OCDC is a success story. It still exists. It still exists no matter how many horror stories come to our attention, and therefore, it's succeeded. And if this success story makes you uncomfortable, if it assaults your spirit like it assaults mine, then we must say no to OCDC. We must say no to criminalization and punishment. We must demand alternatives that reduce our reliance on caging human beings that are all endowed with promise. And we must demand alternatives that give us a chance to heal to the degree that's possible. So when I think about the successful failure of OCDC, that's structured into its very fabric a violent tapestry of punishment and deprivation, my attention turns towards finding ways for us to collectively escape OCDC in a way that would open the door wider to all of us to access more effective, just, and less costly responses to the social conflicts and harms that we presently criminalize. In CPAP's first submission to the OCDC task force, we identified over 25 measures that could be implemented to this end. And given the time restraints, however, I'll focus on 6. Slide, please. First, to better meet the needs of survivors and accused parties, we should expand the capacity to offer restorative and transformative justice encounters. In cases where survivors and accused parties both voluntarily agree to take part in such a process. And from there, provincial policy directives could be issued requiring police officers, Crown attorneys, and duty counsel to inform survivors and the accused of the availability of these alternatives to the penal process. They should choose how to proceed ahead. That's my opinion. Second, to avoid the harms of penalty, especially in cases where persons are being criminalized in relation to their use of drugs or while experiencing mental health crises, the Government of Ontario, following the recommendations of the John Howard Society of Ontario, should expand the capacity of pre-charge and post-charge diversion programs for these populations. Third, to decrease the number of persons detained before the conclusion of their criminal law proceedings, the Government of Ontario should lobby the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of Canada to enact a new legal framework for bail that respects the presumption of innocence by putting in place fixed targets to dramatically limit the use of pretrial detention. Recognizing that it's going to take some time for the federal government to enact new bail legislation, there are still avenues available to the Government of Ontario to make short-term policy reforms in this area to reduce the number of remanded prisoners held in OCDC, and a good place to start is just to listen to Abby Deshman and proceed ahead with some of those short-term things we can do within the framework that we have. Fourth, to expand the number of offenses where sentencing judges have the discretion to impose, following Section 718(2)(e) of the Criminal Code of Canada, all available sanctions other than imprisonment that are reasonable in the circumstances that should be considered for all criminalized persons, with particular attention to the circumstances of Indigenous peoples. The Government of Ontario needs to request that the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada review all mandatory minimum sentences and at the very least repeal those that were enacted from 2006 to 2015. Fifth, once a person arrives at OCDC, there are a number of tools that can be used to alleviate facility crowding that would also promote the timely and safe re-entry of prisoners into the community. So one obvious starting point would be to extend the use of temporary absences of up to 72 hours authorized by the superintendent of the facility, which are currently only available to prisoners serving a prison term, as to extend it to legally innocent prisoners for the purposes of accessing their lawyers, education, training, employment, volunteer, and other outside opportunities that would promote their personal well-being and, by extension, our collective well-being. OCDC superintendent should also expand the authorization of temporary absences and parole for sentenced prisoners who apply for them, especially in the cases of individuals scheduled to serve intermittent sentences on the weekend who live safely among us during the week. Does it make sense to incarcerate people on the weekend when they live and work amongst us every other day of the week safely? To me, that makes absolutely no sense. Lastly, to ensure that what is criminalized in Canada reflects the values of its citizens, the Government of Ontario should request that the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of Canada launch an exhaustive review of the Criminal Code of Canada to identify offences that ought to be decriminalized and legalized in keeping with evolving societal standards. The Criminal Code has become way too big in this country. So with sustained public attention in the media, the presence of many engaged community members, yourselves, and groups, and the political will to make a difference, and I do think there is political will to do something here, there's now an opportunity to put in place additional pathways to divert residents of Ottawa and surrounding areas away from incarceration in a manner that will result in better, but not fixed, living and working conditions at OCDC that cannot be missed. The time for Band-Aid solutions, including the mass transfer of prisoners from the Innis Road Jail to other facilities that took place shortly after the OCDC task force was launched, has long passed. Such approaches are unacceptable, and they're unacceptable because they do violence to all of us. They do violence to our spirits. Thank you.